Evening, everyone. Question that popped out immediately. Is Phil in a Santa hat? No, he is not. Not because I'm any sort of Scrooge, like pre-Christmas Scrooge. I lost my Santa hat a couple of years ago, and I actually just keep forgetting to get another one. I was even in Morrison's yesterday. Forgot to go and have a look to see if they had Santa hats. So no headgear at all. I have a lovely Christmas background behind me though. So what I thought we would discuss, we can celebrate the fact that this is the last Tory Christmas. I hope forever. When I say the last Tory Christmas forever, I don't mean that the Tories will never come back to power. I mean, that's ridiculous. Of course they will. What I hope is that they cannot again get 100% of the power with like 40% of the vote, 45% of the vote, whatever. What I want is before they can ever get themselves in position to challenge again, that we have proportional representation. My hopes remain high. I don't dare say what my expectations are, but my hopes remain high. So before we go through some of the questions, let us just have a little look at the state of play. Although this isn't the last stream of the year, I will be on this time next Saturday because we're just missing the key days. So it will be New Year's Eve next week, just like it's Christmas Eve today. But I thought in next week's stream, it's not next year's stream just yet. Next week's stream, we could have a look at 2024. So we may as well just have a little look at where we stand at the end of this year. And I've gone with the poll of polls here. I occasionally do this only because if you pick a particular polling company, they'll go, oh, you're just picking the one that suits you. So the poll of polls, which averages out a load of pollsters, most of which are crap. But here it is. This is what the Conservatives are on as of today. 24%, Labour on 43%, Lib Dems on 11%, the Green Party on 6%, Reform UK on 9%. Now, because there's been a question earlier on asked on something similar to this, that Reform UK is a really important figure, because if Reform UK stand candidates in every seat and that figure is accurate, it means Labour win a lot more seats. If, however, Reform UK either do not stand in a load of seats, they do some deal or some other shenanigans, which means that actually they stand in hardly any seats like last time, then it substantially impacts the number of seats that Labour are likely to win, because there's a load of marginals this time round. The other thing is, if that Reform UK figure is, as I believe, a little bit higher than it realistically is, then that impacts some seats as well. And someone just said earlier on, well, actually, there's a couple of questions earlier on just to point out, but Phil saying there, reported that Reform UK will challenge in every seat at the general elections. This is every seat in Britain, they've said. I will still say it remains to be seen. They haven't selected very many candidates at all. Labour and the Conservatives have they are now selecting candidates for everywhere now. Labour have opened up all their remaining selections. I don't keep close enough tabs on the Tories, but I assume they're doing likewise. Labour are making sure that they are ready for a spring general election if that's what happens. The Conservatives are also giving the impression that they want to be ready. And the thing is, just because you get all your candidates sorted now doesn't mean that you're ready for, that you're getting ready for a general election in the next couple of months. You want your candidates to go out and about campaigning. I mean, the candidate for the new constituency I'm going to be in was selected a few months ago, and they've been out and about. So the earlier you can select your candidate, the better. Reform UK, I mean, they're hardly any. They've selected hardly any. I don't think they've got the infrastructure to vet basically about 600 candidates. They're not going to be putting candidates in. They've not claimed, So I haven't read the Times. There's a Times article today talking about Reform UK again. There's so many articles you'll get that like presenting it as if it's news. It's not really news. Reform UK have been saying for some time that they're going to stand candidates. People like me go, yeah, you said that last time. You said that in 2019. Then look what happened. Now, I believe they want to. this time. I don't actually see that it's strategically beneficial for them to do a deal this time, because they're going to, like, even if Reform UK didn't stand anywhere, the Tories are still going to lose. They're just not going to lose as badly. But they are still going to lose. There's no hung, this, is there a hung parliament? Or that's not contingent on Reform UK standing or not. The difference between Reform UK standing or not is basically the difference between the Tories being on 200 seats or 150 seats. So, but there we go. So, in fact, Sue's got here, Tories keep taking our presents. Wouldn't it be nice if Labour start to give them back? Well, in terms of human rights, you say, but I say in terms of everything. What I would say is at Christmas, or just roundabout as you're heading into winter, we're now in winter, right? As you're heading into winter, it just brings into sharp focus the cost of living, your standard of living. But Christmas adds an extra dimension for people who engage with Christmas. It means, you're not just, we're encouraged to consume a lot more, aren't we? I've got the nice food in. Lots of people want the nice food and drinks. And you're encouraged to get presents for people. So it's a very high consumer period. That is not happening this year. I know that's not happening this year because I keep saying I'm very much in tune with advertising rates because it's how I get my income. So I can see that advertisers are not spending anywhere near as much at the moment, or this year, this last few months, as they would have in the same period in previous years. So I know that is likely to be as a result of the fact that consumers are not going to be spending as much. They don't think it's worth spending as much on advertising because there's either less to sell or fewer people to sell to. So, but nonetheless, it's a time of year when people really start to think about their standard of living, what they can afford compared with what they expect to be able to afford. And I would say this should be the last year where things are getting worse. There's not going to be a magic wand waved. There's no Christmas miracle and everyone's fine next year. But next year, depending on when the election is, but we should still be seeing something getting better. Even if that election is on October the 31st, obviously Labour cannot turn things around immediately, but just the boost they would give to businesses, not people. I'm not talking about giving people hope. People can't live on hope. But just giving businesses the confidence that there's a government now that's going to have a coherent industrial strategy and business strategy, I think will make a difference. So I think this is the last year, for some time at least, for some considerable time. I'm hoping there isn't going to be another pissing financial crash over the horizon because that'll knacker it. But assuming that, no one cocks anything up between the relations between the US and China, which I think is the main danger with another financial crash. But that is what I would say we should be able to look forward to after this year. Year on year, probably for a decade at least. Hope, again, like international events aside, we should be able to look forward to each year being better than the last. And I intend to be able to show that with data. This time next year, I want to compare the economic data as well as other useful metrics with this year and do that each year. I am just going to go for another comment that came at the end. It's slightly off tangent, but it's a really important comment. It says, is there any way the general public can take action against the government for all of the fraud and stolen money? Find it all so frustrating. Yes, there is. You contact your MP, and I'm serious about that. You contact your MP. Normally, I say if you're going to contact your MP, if it's a Tory MP, absolutely, because they're the MPs in power. If you've got a Labour MP, contact them. If you're in a constituency right now that you think is going to go to Labour, contact your Labour candidate. If they've already selected a candidate, email them about it. Get them, and persuade people to do the same. Because I'll tell you something. We know the Tories, obviously, it's their fraud. We know that they're not really that interested in chasing it. Labour have said they are interested in chasing it, but really let your local Labour MP or candidate, if you're in a constituency that's between the Tories and the Lib Dems or SNP, contact those instead. But contact whichever candidate in your constituency is best placed to nick the seat off the Tories. It might be an existing MP of an opposition party, or it might be just a candidate that's hoping to take it. Contact them and tell them, you can wish them luck if you like in the election and say, if you win, I will be very interested in knowing what you are going to do to chase down this fraud and to bring those responsible for criminal behaviour to justice. That is what you can do, and that is what you can encourage other people to do. Because when an MP gets lots of emails about the same thing, they work on the assumption that there's lots of other people interested in it, and because they know most people can't be bothered to email their MP about these things. So it's almost like one of these, every email they get's worth like 100 voters or something silly. We've had examples of this. We've had examples of this with Tory MPs. If I could pick on lots of examples, I'll pick on the Owen Paterson example because that's the most stark. Boris Johnson got his MPs, in order to get Owen Paterson off, he got his MPs to vote to basically disband the Standards Committee. He couldn't nobble them. He couldn't stop them recommending the suspension. He couldn't stop the vote in Parliament. He knew that the vote would have to confirm it because he knew his MPs wouldn't vote against it. So he basically said, right, we'll disband the whole Standards Committee. We'll just disband it. And he voted to do that, and that happened. 2 days later, with their tail between their legs, Jacob Rees-Mogg, as leader of the House, had to come back, say, sorry, we're going to ask you to vote to put it back again now. It's hugely embarrassing. Why did that happen? Because the public went mad. There was a public backlash. So when members of the public email their MP, if there's enough people doing it, it gets them to action. So that is what I would say. Whatever you think, imagine that you are, after the election, going to have an MP that is interested in what you have to say or what you care about. Always work on that assumption. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not. Just work on the assumption and put in and send them emails saying, this is what I am interested in. Can I get your, what are your thoughts? What are you going to do as my local MP to address this? I mean, I will be doing that. I will have things that I want my local MP, who should be a Labour MP then, to be focusing on, and I shall be contacting them about it. I mean, I can talk to them about it because I'm a Labour member, but still. Could Labour give everyone 20% off their national insurance as a Christmas present 2024 if they're in power by then? What's the point? There's things like that. Tax cuts when you've got a knackered economy doesn't do any... Because it's not... There's people who don't need it. I don't need it. I don't need 20 quid off my national insurance. Charge me an extra 200 quid on my national insurance, for goodness sake. I don't need it. Extra 2,000 if necessary. I don't need it. There's people who do need it. So it's always my view with taxation. You don't bleed people dry like the Tories do, but you need to make sure that if there's going to be a tax cut, it needs to be on people who are struggling. It needs to be. Don't cut the taxes of people who can manage those taxes. Leave them where they are. Labour should and probably will leave the tax rates where they are. I don't see them reducing them for a long time if they ever do. But what they can do is move the goalposts a bit. They can reduce. What they can do is make sure that, because first of all, they need every penny they can get for investments. I mean, Labour, again, it's been reported that having to talk about this £28 billion green investment. Can we really afford? They're trying to make sure they don't trip up for the election, but so they need every penny. Don't cut taxes. Don't cut anyone's taxes. Make sure people, and also, focus on making sure people get paid more. Can I find something just really quickly? I probably can't actually. No, never mind. But in real terms, people's income has gone down over the last ever since the banking crash. It's never recovered. People's earnings haven't recovered. GDP hasn't recovered. Nothing's recovered. The Tories just squandered everything. Actually, before I go through another couple of questions, just following on from this poll, I am just going to put up what the current MRP prediction, according to Electoral calculus. It's very rough and ready. Don't take it too seriously. But, you know, again, it'd have to have a hell of a margin for error to be anything other than worrying for the Tories. So these poll ratings, by the way, would result in this sort of parliament. The Conservatives on 134 seats, Labour on 444, and the Lib Dems on 34. Now, depending on what happens in Scotland, that could well end up with the Lib Dems being the third largest party, getting their second question back for PMQs. But we will see. You say housing's the metric, Phil. Housing is a good metric over a course of a parliament. I'm not convinced it's the best one to use in the initial years, you know, because you'll have to ramp it up, because it's not like we can just say, right, there's going to be now housing, because materials, builders, things like that. So it's the sort of thing I can, if like, so what have Labour said? Labour have actually given a target for this, haven't they? But their target is for how many houses in the first 5 years? Haven't they said 1 million houses? I think Labour have said 1 million houses, but they haven't said 200,000 houses a year. Now, that million, by the way, I'm don't quote me on the actual number. Might be 500,000. But they've said a particular number of, I think 1 million is more realistic. I think they've said a particular number of houses, that new homes that are going to be built in their first parliament. But they've given it as a how many homes over 5 years rather than each year. Because if you're going to say we're going to get 1 million homes in the first 5 years, it's not realistic to have 200,000 homes in the first year and then 200,000 each year. You'll start off with whatever. I don't know what it's already at. But you know, you'll start off on a bit more than it's currently at, because remember, it takes time to build them as well. And by the 5th year, we should be building more than 200,000 homes a year. So the average is out at 200,000. So yeah, that's why I would say housing will be a good metric as we get ready for the following election. But in terms of year on year, the metrics that I would say would be really good, people's real term incomes. And I think separate it out as well. You can have, you know, average incomes, but also public sector incomes. Maybe, I don't know how easy it will be. I'll contact the ONS when I need to. I don't know how easy it will be for me to just say public sector pay. It may be. But I could just pick a few interesting public sector pay awards. You could look at, for example, teachers' salaries, nurses' salaries, doctors, junior doctors' salaries, consultant salaries, things like that. Did I see the Angela Rayner interview on Restless Politics? I haven't listened to that yet, no. I may have time tomorrow, although I still have 2 videos to do tomorrow, although I don't think they're going to take particularly long. We're going to be entering a period where there's not that many people going to be watching YouTube. So, you know, we're not going to have the full schedule. There'll be 1 video tomorrow on something. There'll be another one on Christmas Day when I'm just likely to talk about the channel, because it's basically 5 years since I not started the channel, but started to know what to do with it. When I sort of decided, right, I'm going to do this with the channel. It's basically 5 years, almost to the day. I can't remember exactly when it was. I know it was a few days before Christmas that I decided. Can't remember exactly when. But I'm going to do like a 5-year review on Christmas Day. And then there'll be one on Boxing Day and probably one on the 27th. And we'll see from there. So there might be quite a few days. It's like 1 video a day. Basically because, not because I'm lazy, or that I'll be rammed doing lots of social things, because I won't. It'll just be because there's only going to be so many people watching YouTube. You say, because we're in a pretend economy, in a pretend democracy, in a pretend government, and the pretense is about to end. Well, yeah, I mean, apart from anything else, I understand that people are not going to necessarily have as much faith in Labour government as I do. But do bear in mind, Labour cannot afford to do what the Tories do. They can't do the same thing, because no one covers for them. The media cover for the Tories all the time. Even though you can see articles in the media, like the Times has consistently over the last few years really despaired of the way the Tories have gone. You know, the Times is sort of written from the point of view of proper conservatives. They really haven't liked this populist nonsense. And yet they'll still back the Tories. They still are. They're still covering for the Tories in many ways. You know, so you will get the same thing. The mainstream media will cover for the Tories always, absolutely every single time. Have Labour said whether or not they'll pull the Tory Freeport crap? Not that I've seen, no. I've not seen any policies on that. Again, I don't think we ever would see anything because it's a classic case of making sure they don't need to announce it to avoid spooking the horses. It's the sort of thing, if they were minded to say we're not having any of this nonsense, all Labour have to do to deal with free ports, I really don't know whether they want to or not, okay? All they have to do if they want to deal with free ports is just order independent investigations. You know, people living on Teesside will know this. So there was a request for an independent investigation into the Teesside Freeport, and the government nobbled it. So there is an investigation going on, or has been going on, I don't know, I've not kept up with it. But it was not independent, so there's no value in me even chasing it up. All Labour have to do is make sure there's some proper, that the books are gone over, some proper investigations going on. In fact, Teesside's going to get quite interesting next year because the mayoral election is likely to flip that Labour. So all of a sudden, all the stuff that the Tories are hiding about it is going to become uncovered, isn't it? But if they do it ahead of the... because the Tories are billing it as this big investment project, right? There's no point, and some people believe it and some won't. Labour don't do themselves any good by talking about threatening something that some people think is an investment, right? So there's no need for them. Am I going to be cooking Christmas dinner in my household? Yes, I am. My partner does not really do cooking. You know, my partner's idea of cooking is taking something out of a can and putting it in a pan and applying heat to it. So yes, I shall be doing the cooking. James saying there, due to the minimum wage going up, the personal allowance should go up as well. The personal allowance should go up with inflation regardless. Otherwise, it's a real terms tax increase. That's what we've got at the moment. Income tax is effectively going up in real terms. Now, what would I like Labour to do about that? I wouldn't say, given that the Tories have basically put into their spending plans that the tax bands are frozen for the next few years anyway, and Labour have said they're committed to those sort of plans. If they adjust them, what you do, you can't just say, let's let the personal allowance go up. You do need to do that, I think. I think that is needed. But you are going to have to rebalance it somewhere else. I mean, I'm not opposed to the SNP's idea of just adding another tax band on. I would add another 2 tax bands on. Because the tax bands really, from the point of view of someone earning a lot of money, the tax bands are very contracted. You know, it's like, why isn't there a tax band for people earning, say, over £250,000 a year? Why isn't there another tax band for people earning over £1 million a year? Or have it £250,000, £500,000, whatever. But, you know, the idea that the highest tax band, I looked this up recently, I keep forgetting what it is, something like £140,000 or something. I'm going to look it up again. I always forget what they are. For goodness sake. Why can you never just see it simply? Oh, here it is. Right, so... 125, just over 125, no, £150,000, sorry. £150,000 thereabouts. I don't think is this up to date? I'm not sure this is up to date. But round about that anyway, and that's the highest band. And you're thinking, that's mad. That's absolutely mad. Private, I've been doing a lot of digging on the Teesside Freeport debacle. Yeah, well, they're pretty much the only ones who have. Byline Times have had a look at it. And obviously local media have been interested, but we haven't heard much nationally. Labour must reform the BBC like Tusk did in Poland. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I've seen all the right wing going absolutely apeshit about what Tusk is doing in Poland. I've not really paid attention to it myself, I have to say, so I don't really know. But I'll tell you what I would say. Obviously, Tusk has gone right in. Whatever he's doing in Poland, and I don't know, he's gone right in. I know how it works in this country. Labour won't get away with that. They will have to do it slowly, right? But I do want to see, and Labour, I will say on Leveson, Labour have said that they're not committed to Leveson 2, and that if the Tories, which they're going to do, if they legislate to remove Leveson 1, if they legislate to remove the recommendations that are already put in place, they won't oppose it. Won't oppose it is not the same as supporting it. Now, there's one of two ways you can read that. I'll leave it up to you. The first way is to say that Labour are basically backing away from media regulation, and because they're too scared of the media, then they're basically going to let them get away with it. You can look at it like that. It's really difficult to say otherwise. The other way of looking at it is if you work on the assumption that Labour are not stupid and they recognise that media regulation is absolutely essential because the media are always on the side of the Tories. So if Labour is saying that they're not that bothered about the Leveson recommendations, that they're not going to implement the rest of them, and if the Tories get rid of the existing ones before the election, they won't oppose it, but they won't support it, but they won't oppose it. What could that mean? It could mean they're planning on launching their own updated, modern investigation, which is what I've all called for in the first place. Public inquiry is what I meant to say. They're going to launch their own public inquiry. I think it should be modernised because if you think 10 years ago, think about how news media has changed, social media and like channels like GB News and Talk TV. I think you actually need a new review anyway. So it could be, I know there's nothing to base this on. I'm not saying I think they'll do this, but you could interpret that as Labour are planning to do their own anyway. So they don't care what the Tories do about Leveson because as far as they're concerned, there's going to be a new one. I don't know. What I do know is that there are some things that if Labour want to make a real difference for the future, for the long-term future, there are certain things they have to do. They have to bring in electoral reform. They must do. Even if it is like, I want proportional representation, because there are so many things that have majority public support that will never get implemented in our current system because our system does not reflect majority public opinion. Proportional representation does that. As soon as you've got a parliament that is representative of the public, then the policies will represent the public. It's really that simple. But at this point, I would even take STV. But then I don't think I need worry about that because, proportional representation is, you can say transferable vote basically failed in the previous referendum, whereas proper proportional representation didn't. But they have to do that. They have to bring in media regulation. But then the good thing about PR is if you bring PR in, media regulation follows anyway. There's so many things, like you could sit down and think, if you look at how broken our politics is, you could come up with 24 things, 24 reforms that we should make. None of them will stick without PR, because if you don't have PR, the Tories come back to power 10, 15 years, don't matter. They come back to power at some point. And whatever you've implemented, you might have implemented media regulation. Do you know what? They'll just destroy it again. Doesn't matter what Labour reform. There's nothing Labour can do that the Tories cannot destroy straight away. There are things the Tories can do that Labour can't undo. Brexit's going to take a long time to undo, and we'll never properly undo it in that go back to where we were because the EU is not the same and we can't be the same to join the EU again. So the Tories can do that because that's destroying. The Tories can destroy things, so they can tie the hands of a future Labour government. But because Labour create things, they cannot tie the hands of the following Tory government. So you have to bring in PR. And if you bring in PR, everything else naturally follows. Media regulation will follow because, do you know what? The majority of MPs in Parliament will want media regulation because the media only favours the Tories and a little bit like Reform UK. It doesn't favour Labour. It doesn't favour the Lib Dems. It doesn't favour the Green Party. And if you've got a Parliament where over 50% MPs are consistently Labour, Lib Dems and the Green Party, at least for the foreseeable future, then the majority of Parliament's going to want media regulation. Hang on a minute. There's various questions I'm probably missing now. Wanga Pagan saying, as a disability benefits claimant, I really hope Labour actually improve the system. How do I think they'll do this? The easy thing to say is what the thing that Labour could change instantly, overnight, and should be the very first thing that happens, is it Liz Kendall, who's the Shadow Minister for Department for Work and Pensions. I'm still not completely up on the changes to the Shadow Cabinet, because unfortunately most of Labour's front bench are fairly invisible. But I think it's Liz Kendall. But whoever it is, they can go in straight away and say there's not going to be any of this quotas for sanctions bollocks. So you can go straight in and say, you know, there's a system for qualifying for certain benefits. If people qualify, they qualify them. You do, and another thing that can change overnight, this nonsense about who decides whether someone is fit for work. No, it's a doctor that decides that. It's a doctor, or two doctors if you want. If you want two medical opinions, you can get two. But they're doctors' opinions. They're not someone on minimum wage who says to someone in an office in the Department for Work and Pension, can you walk to that door and back? Oh, you can, therefore you can do a full day's back-breaking work. You know, that's not what happens. You can change that immediately. In terms of like deeper reforms, Labour have already said that they, and this isn't like the long time, they've done this more recently as well, that they will be replacing universal credit, but I don't know what the time frame on that is. It was always Labour's view under multiple leaders that universal credit actually isn't a fair and simple system as the Tories bill it. So that is there. You say, sadly, Starmer's implacably opposed to electoral reform. No, he's not. Blair was opposed to it. You're right there. Starmer is absolutely 100% not. And I know this from people close to the Labour leader's office, but it's also obvious in the way he phrases it. He keeps talking about not a priority, not a priority. He has never once said that he is opposed to it. He's never even given the hint he's opposed to it. The reason why it's not going in the manifesto is two reasons. First of all, there's huge differences between Starmer and Blair, and one of the big differences, Starmer does not say we're doing it this way and that's all there is to it, right? Or very rarely does. He actually, and we know this from members of his shadow cabinet, he actually involves shadow cabinet. There's proper, genuine collective decision making. That is not always the case in every cabinet or shadow cabinet. But there is collective decision making there. This is why there's been a few times where Keir Starmer, it sounds like he's waited a few days to say something, or to when a situation, and you know, this is one of the weaknesses of it. When a situation's arisen, it's like, right, what's your policy on this then? He's sometimes taken a couple of days, and it's because he's getting consensus or agreement. So the positions that Starmer adopts are not entirely his. He gets shadow cabinet agreement. But the other thing is, I know from the concern with the leader's office is the fear that it spooks the horses. Labour at the moment are absolutely scared, Richard, and I think excessively so. I think it's fair to say excessively so. They know what are the key issues for people, and electoral reform isn't one. They know what the key issues for people are, and they want to spend every moment talking about those key issues. They know that the Tories and the media will attempt to introduce like specious policies to talk about, completely off the wall arguments that got nothing to do with anything, you know, oh, what's a woman type of thing. They're trying to reduce the number of those. If they announce PR, I think they should. But their fear is if they announce PR in this manifesto, because it is such a massive change, all of a sudden it becomes like in 2019, it was all about, from the Tories' point of view, it was all about Brexit. It was all about Brexit from everyone's point of view, actually. It was all about Brexit. Labour do not want this election to be all about electoral reform or keeping the status quo. They want it to be about, the country carrying on going down the toilet or the country being competently run. That's what they want the election to be about. Now, the worry with that is that the same argument holds for the following election as well. But there is going to be a really concerted push, certainly from within Labour, but I'm hoping from outside Labour as well, a real concerted push on proportional representation. There's a lot of groups at the moment are just getting ready for Labour to come to power. So let us see. But there we go. Do I think I might have a chance to interview any of the Labour top team in the new year? No, I'm really bad at that. I've actually attempted to contact Labour MPs and get them to do interviews, even backbenchers. I get nowhere. I sort of give up. I think you've got to be more tenacious than I can be asked with. I'm not that bothered about, it'd be interesting to do interviews. But the thing is, usually, you want to interview someone where their particular remit is topical. So, all of this trying to contact their office to do an interview in like 3 months' time, it's like, well, you missed the boat. You want to be like, oh, this is in the news, or like, some aspect of, say, education is in the news, so I want to be interviewing Bridget Phillips in the next day type of thing. That's not going to happen. They're not interested in that. So I don't really see the point. If they're not particularly interested, and I am not interested enough to keep hassling them. The closest I ever got was Clive Lewis, and even then they just they sounded interesting, and then I just didn't get. I got a couple of replies, a bit of back and forth, and then they just stopped replying to me. So, and I don't chase them. I think people who get the interviews probably chase them. I can't be asked. If they don't want to talk to me, they don't want to talk to me. Would changing to PR require a referendum? Would it be required to be in a manifesto? It can be either. What you need is a public mandate. A public mandate can come from either a referendum or a manifesto. That is constitutional of the situation in this country. Obviously, there are some ways in which a referendum is better because it's on a single issue and the public view is being made clear. Obviously, you would. The thing is, we can sort of tell from previous referenda that we need. If it's possible to lie in them and the referendum is considered sacrosanct, then we're not set up for delivering referenda in this country. So we would need real reform. We'd need to set down in law how referenda are treated. I would suggest that we're not really used to using referenda in this country. We are used to the idea that a party, Labour or the Conservatives really, presents policies in the manifesto, and whichever one wins a majority, everything in that manifesto is deemed to have public approval, whether it does or it doesn't. That's the system we work on. Written constitution would have to be changed every few generations, though. We'd have to find a way of accommodating that. Yeah, this is my issue. When people talk about, the codified constitution, people will come up with examples of countries. Oh, it works well here, works, and then it's like, yeah, it's been like a couple of generations. Sometimes a bit more if it's a less, if you say Ireland, for example, okay, that's been longer, but then Ireland's a much smaller country, there's a much smaller population, it's a lot more cohesive. But if you look at America, it doesn't do them any favors. And I know people will say, oh yeah, but that's deliberate misinterpretation of the Constitution. It doesn't matter. The Constitution, the codified Constitution, is a millstone around Americans' necks. And the thing is, you've got to consider yourself, who's going to write it? Like the thing I keep saying, if anyone says we should have a codified constitution, I would say, do you want Dominic Raab to write it? Because if it's the case that you don't care who writes it, you just want one, okay. But if it matters who writes it, then that's an argument for not having one. We're better off with a flexible. We have a constitution. It's better that it be flexible than it be rigid and written by someone who doesn't have our interests at heart. And we especially don't want to get into a situation where in 70 years' time, it's treated as this set in stone set of edicts that is no longer fit for the modern world. So I would rather we just didn't. Should Labour introduce the stocks into their manifesto? Interested to see which Tory MPs have put them in first. No, we don't need to humiliate Tories. Just put them in prison so they can't do anyone any more harm. But there we go. With PR, would we ever see a right-wing coalition of Tory reform, or would the left-wing majority of the last 40, 50 years just persist? It'd be an interesting one. The thing is that the British public are generally centre-left, but there is a significant proportion of the population tend to be more authoritarian. And that's how Reform UK managed to acquire so... Even if the share of the vote is not quite as large as indicated here, they still managed to get a significant share of the vote when they're a party that hasn't been in operation for very long. And it's really because... it's a shame I haven't got my political compass handy. I probably haven't. But I always sort of say, like, the political compass, for those who aren't aware, is a much better way of thinking about politics. Instead of just pure... People think of just purely left and right, but then they lump in economic and social attitudes, but it doesn't work. So left and right technically is economic policy. Most people in this country are left, not very left-wing, but they are left-wing. But if you have another axis, social attitudes, where you've got authoritarian up and liberal down. If you think about the mainstream parties, so you've got Labour, the Green Party, the SNP, who Plaid Cymru as well, who are socially liberal and left-wing, to varying degrees, but they're socially liberal and left-wing. You've got the Liberal Democrats, who are socially liberal and sort of straddle left and right-wing. You've got the Conservatives, who are mostly authoritarian and right-wing. Now, the reason why you have some socially liberal people in the Conservative Party is because there isn't really a credible party that is socially liberal and right-wing. You've got the Lib Dems, who are sort of round the centre. You haven't got anyone that's quite right-wing, but socially liberal. So the socially liberal right capitalists basically go to the Tories. And what it does is it leaves, if you imagine this political compass, it leaves the whole of the top left quadrant completely unoccupied, or it did do until recently. You know, you've got a whole swathe of the population, and it's a big old chunk, who are left-wing. They want strong public services. They don't mind the taxes to pay for it. They're not about low tax. They're not about low regulation. They are about locking up criminals and keeping the foreigners out there. So they are authoritarian in their attitudes. And UKIP, first of all, started to tap into this. The Brexit Party and Reform UK did so, as have done so since. So that is why Reform UK are doing better than you might expect, for even if it's a well-resourced, but for a brand new party. And they absolutely could work with the Conservatives in coalition if they were able to get more than 50% of the seats otherwise. I just think they would struggle, but you can't rule it out. But I think they would struggle. I would never say that the voting behaviour of the last 50 years or 70 years or whatever will carry on, because apart from anything else, if you change the voting system, you will change voting behaviour. But because I think, well, I know that most of the population is slightly left-wing, and because I think most of it is actually socially liberal, even if, you know, that includes some people on the right who are socially liberal, I don't think the Tories plus Reform UK would, in the foreseeable future, in my lifetime, get over 50% of the vote. Not even with the DUP. Starmer's average approval rating is concerning. Blair was adored like king in the 1997 general election. Starmer's not enthusing the public. At the moment, it's clearly not. It is a concern, though, because we have to then think, so once he's in power, once he's no longer just the this is better than the Tories, will it be a concern then? It's probably fine to come across as a technocrat when things need fixing. My concern will be, so imagine a future in a few years' time, and I don't know whether this will be 5 years' time, 7 years' time, 8 years' time, whatever. But imagine some point in the future where Labour are now achieving, they've achieved a bit of a turnaround in people's standard of living. Things are now noticeably better. And the Conservatives have dealt with their silly infighting. They've started to unite again. And they've selected a leader who is charismatic. So that worst case scenario, Labour have now got people's standard of living up. And the Tories are working well as a unit, and they're behind a charismatic leader. In a situation like that, then yes, Keir Starmer probably at that point will no longer be an asset, and he needs to go and be replaced by someone else. The thing then is Labour at that point will need a charismatic leader. Where is that coming from? We do not know. Because it can't. It's no good just going for charisma and ending up with Labour's equivalent to Boris Johnson. You know, you need someone who's also strategic and will appeal to lots of target voters. We don't need another. You know, again, there was an interview earlier this year with Neil Kinnock, who said 1992 the big problem was he was Marmite and John Major was Marmalade. In other words, you know, people weren't really put off John Major. He had that sort of personality that didn't necessarily appeal to everyone, but didn't put anyone off, whereas he appealed to some people and put others off. So we need to avoid that. We can't have that. But it won't be a Starmer's, charisma won't be a problem at the moment. I do keep saying he'll do his charisma wonders if he would just do that podcast with me. I'll sort him out. But I don't think he's interested. But there we go. Low taxes tend to appeal to people who have alternative social services. If your safety net's the old school tie, jobs for mates, then you resent paying for the system you'll never need to rely on. Or just pure greed. The thing is, tax cuts do sort of work on people that it's not really saving them much. You know, the Tories are putting in this national insurance cut in the new year very quickly so that people can see it in their pay packets or on their pay slips before the new tax year. And it's like, look, that's saving you 20 quid. And it's like, well, it won't even be saving a lot of people 20 quid. And it'd be like, yeah, that's, but everything else has gone up. The cost of energy's gone up. Food's still going up. But there we go. Angry Pagan saying, Starmer to me is the leader to move the Overton window back leftwards. Once this is achieved, replace him. Relatively simple. I mean, certainly replace any, you don't stick with a leader. Put it this way, the public do not stick with politicians based on what they've done in the past. The public go, oh, you've achieved this, yeah, we're very thankful for that. Thanks very much. What are you going to do for us next? So the public are really always looking to the future. So internally within the Labour Party, they need to do the same. I would say the same thing. Starmer could not put a foot wrong. He doesn't need to have another cock up like the Iraq War or something. He could do everything right. But at the point at which he is a liability, not an asset, thanks very much. Off you go now. Off you pop. I will be the first calling for him to stand aside for someone else. I just hope that someone else is someone suitable. My worry is, in this country, our system of politics does not really create very many credible political leaders. It really doesn't. I cannot think of anyone in Labour at the moment who would be a good replacement for Starmer in, say, 6 or 7 years' time. That's my worry. The Constitution should be written by Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams. Well, there's certain operational difficulties with doing that. But anyway, on a political compass, I'm about as far to the duet as you could get. When it comes to my moral compass, let's see, it wiggles a bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a communist, but, I quite far to the left. But socially, I'm not actually as socially liberal. I am on the socially liberal side. But I do have a few, if I'm honest, I do have a few authoritarian tendencies as well. Not so much on the traditional lock them up forever or keep the foreigners out. But, you know, there are some people I think just to get, you know, I think there's a few more smacks to the face required of people. But there we go. Sturgeon was probably the greatest political operator in the last decade. I would agree with that in terms of British politics. I think there's a couple of Northern Irish politicians who may compete on that. So, but if we're talking about purely Britain, I would certainly agree that Sturgeon has been the most effective political leader in the last decade. Absolutely. She managed to keep the lead on SNP internal affairs while winning 3 general elections in Scotland, maintaining their grip on power. Yes, I would say so. But all of these things come to an end at some point. And what happened, you know, where one major failing of Sturgeon, apart from ending up with a police investigation, which even if there's no charges laid, obviously something has happened, something untoward has happened, but also a failure to make sure that there was an obvious successor. I think in politics, like if you look at Labour, when Blair went, everyone knew for years before Blair went it was going to be Brown. And it was a smooth transition. Now, he wasn't a great campaigner. You could argue maybe he wasn't the best. I thought he was a good prime minister, but he wasn't a good campaigner. So as soon as Labour were in trouble, he was not the person to be leading them into a general election. But there was no wrangling, there was no change of direction, there was no pissing about, there was no, we've got rid of that leader, now we need to completely change everything we're doing, which is what the Tories have done. It was just, this leader is now a liability. Off you go. Thanks very much, Tony. Off you pop. Gordon's the man now. What political parties need to do is they need to make sure there's effectively an anointed successor. It really important for stability. And that's obviously didn't happen with the SNP. I think Yusuf's done all right, actually. I think he's done okay. But I'm still not convinced that either the public or the party have that much faith in him. But there we go. Well, Angry Peg saying, I'd like to see Ed Miliband have another pop at the job. No. I think he's learned, don't get me wrong. I think he's a humble man. And as most people who have some humility, he's learned lessons. Because to learn lessons, you have to accept that you've done things wrong. Egomaniacs don't learn lessons because they don't think they did anything wrong. They thought it was like the fates conspiring or something like that. But I think there are some people who are brilliant lieutenants but not good captains. And I think Ed Miliband is one of those. I think he will be a superb minister. I think he'll be a superb Secretary of State. I think he's already been very effective in the last few years. He's totally on top of his brief. But I don't think he's leadership material. Because there were various things wrong with Ed Miliband's leadership of Labour. It wasn't just one thing. But one of the things was that his personality was simply not strong about. His personality hasn't changed. He's still the same Ed Miliband. He's not. He doesn't have that charisma either. So that that won't. You might as well keep Starmer as like get Ed Miliband back in. You'd be happy with Captain Scarlet. Andy Burnham secures the women vote in Northern Red War. He's a bit of a snake, though. There's a few people that can have the charisma, but they're just too. They're no. So Andy Burnham, no. I mean, he's not even an MP. He's doing a good enough job as Mayor of Manchester. Just stay there, mate. He's doing a good job there. Why not? I'd be very worried about West Streeting. I'm perfectly happy for him to be in the cabinet. Wouldn't be happy for him to be leader. What's my opinion on Mark Drakeford? I tell you what I think is like the biggest accolade I could give Mark Drakeford. So if I go to my channel, I'm just going to have a quick look at it now. So if I go to my channel, my homepage, there's like a banner there. There's a picture of me for some reason. But then there's a picture of Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, and Hunza Yusuf, and there's nothing of Mark Drakeford. And I have done hardly any videos featuring Mark Drakeford. Now, why is that? Is it because I don't like him? No. It's because if you look at, like, the politics I do is the politics of the crazy, right? And the Welsh government has just quietly got on with its job. You know, so the best thing I can say about Mark Drakeford, he has just, through all the turmoil, all the social, economic, political turmoil of the last few years, and, you know, he came in during that, he hasn't had any stable political period as First Minister. He came in to a shit show, and it's been a shit show throughout, and yet he just quietly got on with it. The Welsh Parliament just quietly does its stuff. The Welsh Government just quietly does its stuff. You know, he formed an effective alliance with Plaid, and he just does his job, and he doesn't attract stupid headlines. And that is what I would say. Tim saying Yvette Cooper would make a much better leader than Starmer. In some ways, I would agree, and you know, I did vote for her when she was up for it. But I think by the time Starmer's stepping down, she will not. They'll need a leader that's seen as the future, because again, what you have to be worried, although I talk about the anointed successor, you have to be, you can't afford to be seen as the party that's just resting on its laurels, stuck in the mud. It has to be forward looking, and the leader's a reflection of that. Yvette Cooper is from the Labour past, so you can absolutely have her in cabinet. Would you have her as the leader now? You've got to think about a lead. People will look at lots of different ingredients that you want in an ideal political leader, and you can say, well, Angela Rayner's got some, and Lisa Nandes has got some, and Keir Starmer's got some, and Yvette Cooper's got some, and you want as many as possible. The problem with Yvette Cooper is she will just be painted by the Tories and the press as Labour's past. So you need someone forward-looking. So ideally, the next Labour leader is someone that we wouldn't even be thinking about at the moment. They might be an MP. They might be an MP now, but they may still be rising. They may not be a member of the shadow cabinet. And I hope that's actually the case, because there's not too many members of the shadow cabinet I would be all that happy with, if I'm honest. Walt saying there, Mark Drakeford's done an excellent job. I live in Wales. I mean, he's just got on with the job of government, just quietly. It doesn't attract controversy, just gets things done. You know, and that's why I just don't do videos on it, because like there's nothing really exciting. I do a video, oh, Welsh government gets its job done. Not many views in that. You say as long as Angela Rayner just keeps calling the Tories scum, she'd get my undying support. And she would piss off a hell of a lot of target voters. That's the problem. She is the Marmite. Angela Rayner would be no good. You know, she's perfectly capable as a senior member of the Labour leadership. But the other thing as well, I'm not convinced she's strategic enough either. Now, there is an extent to which, as long as you get the right advisors, you can compensate for that. You don't have to be like Boris Johnson's not strategic at all. And yet, for a time, he was politically successful because he got the right advisors. Now, you could argue Rayner could do the same thing. But what Rayner cannot do is be appealing. Like, you need to appeal to as many people as possible, sure. But for the people you won't appeal to, you at least have to not put them off. You can't be divisive. You cannot afford to be divisive. I think even if we had proportional representation, it would arguably be less of a problem. But for a party like Labour that still needs that broad appeal, you can't have someone divisive. Really can't. You know, if Keir Starmer ever became divisive because he did a thing, again, you know, that would be reason to get rid of him. How about Chris Bryant? Again, by his own admission, shoots his mouth off too much. We'll see. Maybe he probably already has mellowed a bit with age. Maybe he'd carry on mellowing. But is he the sort of person that can bring a lot of people together? I think he's too opinionated. you know, I mean, lots of politicians are, but he really does shoot his mouth off a bit too much. I mean, I love it when he does, but it's probably not ideal. Again, it's one of these things. There are some people who are really good lieutenants, not good captains. You know, a politician could be really, really good and really good in a leadership position, but not like top of the tree. Who of the newer lot would I pick as potentials? So I've got no idea who will attract enough support. Newer ones who have impressed me, top of the list, unfortunately no longer in shadow cabinet, would be Rosina Allen-Khan. I would say of like in less experienced MPs, that was disappointing for me. Clive Lewis, not at all. Clive Lewis is not a team player. Totally unsuitable. Like really good backbencher. People like Clive Lewis and Dawn Butler are really good backbenchers. They're on top of their game in terms of the issues they champion, but they're not team players. They will not toe the party line, which means if you ever put them in a position of leadership, they have no moral authority to expect others to do the same thing. So no, not Clive Lewis. And a lot of respect for Rayner. She's very direct. I'm very direct. It's not diplomatic. You can have a few. You're a political party. In fact, you actively want a few attack dogs. You know, Angela Rayner can be the John Prescott, basically. You want a few like that. You just don't want them in charge of the party. You know, people need to people need to set their egos aside in politics and recognise that you need to be playing the right position. Like in a football team, not everyone can be banging the goals in. You need some people to keep feeding them in, and your lazy bloody striker just can't be asked to get a move on. But you keep doing it. In a good team, you'll keep whipping those crosses in, and at some point your lazy bastard striker will decide to get their arse moving and actually head it in. You need some people like that. Lisa Nandy is really good in debates, and I certainly don't think that Starmer should have sidelined her like he did. She's far too effective. She's a really good asset. She's not strategic. She's an idiot when it comes to political strategy. Complete moron. Rosina Allen-Khan should not have been demoted. I 100%, I agree on 2 points. I'll have to make this my last point, actually, because we're running out of time. I agree on 2 points. First of all, Allen-Khan is incredibly clever, and although I still think she is not the most politically astute just yet, I think she'll learn. But the other reason I would say that it shouldn't have been done is because what effectively happened is the mental health brief went out of the shadow cabinet. Should not do that. Mental health is one of the most important issues to deal with for the next Labour government. And that position, in the long term, once you've got it sorted, fine, take it from cabinet. It should be a cabinet position. Because that's what cabinet positions are. You've got your secretaries of state, obviously they're in the cabinet, but then you also have some positions for ministers of state who are in charge of a really important aspect of government policy. By removing the mental health brief from the shadow cabinet, Starmer is saying that mental health is no longer the top priority it was. That is the wrong message to be sending. So on both counts, I would say that it was the wrong move. There were a few moves in that last reshuffle that I thought were wrong. But there we go. Say Streeting's getting better. Yeah, but then you think that, and then he comes out and pisses everyone off again. He's too divisive. Far too divisive. You know, he's on top of his brief, and we'll see how he is as I mean, none of these, very few of these Labour frontbenchers are tested in government, so we can't make any assumptions. We'll see how they work out. But yeah, I mean, for a leader, you need someone who can actually bring a lot of very different people together. You cannot have a leader who is... You don't really want a leader who's seen as being in part of any tribe, ideally. And if they are, then they need to be one who's constantly building bridges with the other tribes. But anyway, we'll leave it there. Have a very good Christmas, everyone. We shall be back just before the new year. So I shall just say have a happy Christmas if you can. Have a rest of a good evening. And until next time, I'll see you later.